o Andy Duncan, que vem conversar conosco sobre o Brexit, o que ele realmente significa, ele é especialista em finanças e agente do mercado financeiro. Já trabalhou para JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Credit Suisse, como em várias outras instituições, e também atuou nos principais centros comerciais do mundo, como Londres, Nova York, Singapura, Frankfurt, Dubai e Hong Kong. O Duncan ele tem uma experiência muito grande com a Escola Austríaca, ele é um conhecedor legítimo e eu acredito que será extremamente produtivo numa conferência como essa ter toda a expertise do seu conhecimento para conosco.
Olá, as pessoas lindas do Brasil. Essa garrafa é vodka, não água. Está maravilhoso estar aqui com vocês, mas infelizmente meu português não é suficiente falar para 30 minutos. So now I speak in English. Welcome to my talk. I'm Andy Duncan. I'm from the UK. A good friend of mine is Keir Martland, and together we've just started Mises Centre UK. I'm the co-founder. I'm also the honorary vice president, which is fantastic. Sean Gabb, who some of you might have known, is the honorary president. I wanted to mention this because part of the inspiration for Mises Centre UK is Mises Brazil. And if ever we can get a crowd like this in 10 years, 15 years, it'll be amazing. Okay, let me get on to what I wanted to talk about today. Let's put that down. There we go. So, I'm talking about Brexit. So, Helio, when I met him in January in England, he said, Brexit's happening in the UK. Can you come and talk to us about it? So I want to discuss 3 related topics, how they fit together, and how we can use them to create a freer world. And these topics are historicism, which some of you may have heard of, which is the notion that historic destiny controls us and that we don't control our own lives. The original formation of ancient states and what this can teach us about modern states like Brazil, and secession, particularly in regards to Brexit. See if I can move these slides on. There we are. Historicism, first of all, then. In Thomas More's Utopia, which you can see on the left there, Das Kapital by Marx and Francis Fukuyama's The End of History, we constantly get this message that there is a history that exists as a living entity outside of us. There's some kind of ghost walking around that forms fate and the future world. And this concept, in a nutshell, forms historicism. So this entity, this concept, is a bit like the man in black in the TV series Lost, which some of you may have seen, and has somehow struggled for centuries to kind of control mankind outside of us as people. Now, socialists imagine that this entity is constantly striving towards societal perfection and that it's inexorable and unstoppable and it cannot be stopped. So this is why so many non-revolutionary socialists, such as the Fabian Society from the UK, will say things like they're gradually progressive. What are they gradually progressing towards? A society where cooked chickens will fly into the mouths of hungry workers. So that's this is the kind of this is the perfection that they're aiming towards, where we live in a world state which will be a perfect structure and completely benevolent, and will rule the stars themselves. Now, as Rothbard explained in my favourite Rothbard book, Economic Thought Before Adam Smith, historicism came from Christian millennialism. And this is the belief that one day Jesus will come back in either AD 1000 or AD 2000 or AD 3000 and will create a heaven on earth. And this radical kind of Christianity, this millennialism, found its best expression in Munster in Germany. And you'll also notice the seat of socialism has been Germany. So you have Christian millennialism, where Jesus will come back and create Jerusalem on earth. And then 100 years later or so, you then have radical socialism. But in socialism, what they've done is they've replaced God by the state, and they've replaced millennialism by historicism. Some of you might have read, see if this can work, gone too far there, might have read Isaac Asimov. And Isaac Asimov wrote a series of books called the Foundation series. And in there he develops a very socialist concept called psychohistory. And he creates this concept of a galaxy which is socialist. Every atom in the galaxy is working towards the needs of every other atom, better than Yuri's people just taking as much food as they want. But every atom in the galaxy is working towards this socialist perfection. So this is the idea of heaven then as socialism. But we know that we have people like Chavez, we have people like Castro, we have people like Lenin, people like Hitler, and other socialists. And these are not perfect angels. These are evil men with their own perverse, corrupt ambitions of their own. Now, we know that this world state that they think they're heading towards, where all the socialist countries get together, it's actually going to become a kind of living hell with devils. So these people will be devils ruling over us. But I do like to note that whenever you get an interesting devil on television, it's always an Englishman, which I think is quite interesting. In his book, Our Enemy on the State, Albert J. Nock stated, taking the state wherever we find it, striking into its history at any point, one sees no way to differentiate its activities of the founders from administrators and beneficiaries from those of a professional criminal class. Or, as Murray Rothbard put it in The Ethics of Liberty, the first state begins as a bandit gang writ large, and this first state gang will have terrorized early farmers into handing over tributes and food to avoid the direct threat of cannibalism or murder from these first gangs. And we see this in television today. Some of you may have watched The Walking Dead. And we see Negan with a baseball bat forming a proto-state, the saviors. This is how socialists see themselves, as saviors, using violence to threaten people to give him stuff, their stuff. Now, you might think this is a kind of unique creation. But if you look at one of the first pictures ever recorded from 4,000 years ago, the first pharaoh in Egypt was called King Narmer. This is the first pharaoh of Egypt. And when he created Egypt, one of the first states, he also used something that looked just like a baseball bat. And here you can see him on the Narmer pallet, which is in the British Museum in London, beating people over the head. Look at the similarities, if I can go back. That's Negan. That's Narmer 4,000 years ago. States always start with violence. Now, many of these predator states, of course, arose all over the world, maybe thousands of them. And these early farmers that they terrorized were held hostage by these organized criminals, just like the mafia. And once freed from their daily labor, these gang lords became kings, they became emperors, high priests, generals, and judges, and so on. And then through this evolutionary process of warfare, which some of you may have read in Hopper, each little tiny state kind of coalesces and coalesces and coalesces until now we have about 230 states. And if anyone ever tried to stop this growth, these states would use the Hobbesian myth that if we didn't have the states, that we'd just consume each other in a world of violence. Now, these taxes that these early states will have taken from us, if we listen to Judge Samuel in the Bible, he says that the king of Israel, he will take 1/10 of your grain and of your vineyards and give to his officers and servants. But we've gone from that now to more like 50%, because we take our children and we put them in these day prisons called schools run by the state, and then state workers brainwash children from an early age to believe in the state, and so the state can now take 50%. But this violence, the DNA and the violence and the theft of the state has never left it, but now they call it taxation policy and security policy. One thing they've done, as they've evolved though, they've had to hide their power. So we see here King Pedro II, and what the state has done, it's successfully draped itself in the camouflage of what it calls freedom and democracy. But it's still there in the background. It may look camouflaged, but the same lion is still there biting us with the teeth it's stolen from us. It steals its guns from us, it lives on our substance, and as Rothbard says in The Anatomy of the State, it needs our goodwill and our acceptance of its existence to survive. Now, to generate our goodwill, it spends much of what it takes from us propping up intellectual bodyguards, again from The Walking Dead, which some of you may have seen. This is a character called Eugene, and he switches sides. He becomes an intellectual bodyguard for this first state, and all they have to do is give him a jar of pickles. So he's a very cheaply bought intellectual there. So the intellectuals don't have too many morals. Give them a few things of what you've stolen from others, and they will come to you. But as the Bible says, be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, is walking about and will seek whom he may devour. But this is why I love Brexit. Even the most powerful state can wither away. So we have the Soviet Union, URI's Soviet Union, which for 70 years killed millions of people in its gulag, and yet on one day, one Russian guy, Boris Yeltsin, stands on the state's own tank and completely dissolves the Soviet Union in one day. So the state is not going to grow into this monolith if we don't want it to. It is very weak. It can disappear in a day no matter how powerful the state may look. So let's get back then to Brexit. Now, we saw with Mises explain in 1920 that any socialist world state would collapse for a lack of rational economic calculations, and we see this in Venezuela, of course, which is a terribly sad story. Even Henry Hazlitt, socialism does create these strange diversionary economic things, but even Henry Hazlitt wrote a book saying how a world socialist state would collapse. In time will run back. But how do we need to go to a world state before we can collapse it down to freedom? And I don't think so. I think because of Brexit. Brexit, which was an incredible day. Is this still, well, I'll try and turn this on. Brexit, which was an incredible day. I'll just use the microphone here. Oh, there goes my vodka. I'll probably need a drink of this now. Oh, marvellous. Which was a wonderful, wonderful day. Completely changes everything. The world state, the kind of EU, NAFTA, Mercosur, East Asian alliance gradually grows into this Davos superstate dream of a world state. Brexit completely smashed everything. Before Brexit, we see the European Union becoming larger and ever more menacing. When we see this empire being created. Now, many empires in the past don't go under their own name. So the Athenian Empire of ancient Greece was called the Delian League. Yuri's Soviet Empire called itself the Warsaw Pact. And the American Empire, which I think the EU is part of because there's many, many American troops in Europe, calls itself NATO. Now, that stands for North Atlantic Treaty Organization. But if we take a look at this picture here, there are some NATO troops in Afghanistan, and I don't think that borders the Atlantic in any way. So this American empire is what I think the EU was or is part of. It did seem that one day the EU would merge with NAFTA, with Mercosur, and then finally under the United Nations, we'd create a one world government, which would be a living hell for all of the rest of us. I'm going to call this planned world government the Alliance, because one of my other favorite TV programs, Firefly, which some of you may have seen in the past. Brilliant. Why did they cut Firefly? You know, they keep all these other things going, but they get rid of Firefly. I hope you notice again, if you did watch the movie based on the TV series Firefly, the Alliance was staffed by lots of evil assassins, and all of these evil assassins were also English. When you really need somebody evil, always hire an Englishman to sort yourself out. But I hope England has made up for this with Brexit to deliver this death blow, I hope, to the European Union. Now, we saw following Brexit, we saw Donald Trump coming to power in the United States. I don't think Trump was reliant on Brexit, but I think it's part of the same process where the whole world is waking up and realizing that we have become slaves and that we need to shake off this slavery from these masters who try to completely control us. Now, even the French in the French Revolution tried to throw off slavery, but socialism hijacked the French Revolution, and we have the ancien regime of King Louis XVI turned into the reign of terror under Robespierre. Now, some might find it surprising that socialism was invented in the French Revolution by an aristocrat who was called Count Saint-Simon. But I don't find this surprising at all, because democracy and socialism are often invented by powerful elite groups. Democracy itself was invented by a group called the Alcmenidae, which was a clan in ancient Greece, which created democracy in Athens to cement their own power of their family. And one of the first things they did was use democracy to murder the philosopher Socrates. So thank you, democracy. This is within 2 years of democracy being invented, which is incredible. And whenever we get democracy and socialism coming together, we do get this coercive kind of force developing. So in France, we have the emergence of socialism and the French Revolution. Within 5 years, they have an emperor sweeping through Europe, killing hundreds of thousands of people. And thankfully, this emperor, Napoleon, was faced down by the Portuguese and the Spanish in the Iberian Peninsula, along with a bit of help from the British as well, from the English. But whenever we see socialism and democracy together, they always come together to cement the power of a ruling elite. Now, we saw Daenerys Targaryen. I can't wait till June. Is it really June? What am I going to do? I've watched the old series 3 times now. I can't do it anymore. She said the wheel turns, and she's going to break the wheel, the revolution wheel, which just goes round and round and round, always giving us the same ruling class. Brexit, I think, breaks the wheel. It smashes this world state. So let me tell you how Brexit happened, being an Englishman who lived through it. It all comes down to this one man called Nigel Farage. Now, I've met and spoken with Nigel Farage, and he's quite an ordinary person when you're kind of just chatting to him. But what an incredible man, this single man, this former commodities trader. He left the Conservative Party in 1992, just as an ordinary member, to help create the UK Independence Party. And this was when the British Conservative Party took us into a thing called the Maastricht Treaty. And that took what was the European Economic Community and turned it into the European Union. So overnight, I was not asked for this. We suddenly acquired a president, a flag, an anthem, an army, a ruling court, all in one day, without anyone like me having any say whatsoever about this. Anyway, Nigel Farage fought this, and by 2009, he'd scared the Conservative Party so much, he frightened them, he was going to destroy them, that they had to promise a referendum on the remaining membership of the EU. This is how you get these politicians. Threaten them by taking away their cars and their jobs and their pensions and all those things, and then they will eventually slip down to what you want. Now, 3 unspoken things fed the referendum, the Brexit referendum. The first is David Cameron expected to win a general election, but only with the support of a coalition party called the Liberal Democrats. And then after the election, he would say, yes, I did promise this referendum, but my coalition partners have insisted that I can't have this referendum. Oh dear, what a shame. The problem for David Cameron is he absolutely stormed the election and won a clear majority. He didn't want one. He didn't want a majority. He wanted to win 40% and then get 15% support from someone else. He got 51%. Oh, if you give me that gym equipment, I will go and do some exercises every day. And then you get given the gym equipment. Oh, no, I'm going to have to exercise. Oh. The second thing is nobody expected the referendum to win, and actually included me, because the entire intellectual elite of the UK were pro the EU, pro-socialism, pro having nice, comfortable state jobs with nice salaries and pensions. The BBC, you may have heard of, pro-EU, rabidly pro-EU. Everyone in the kind of ruling elite pro-EU, and nobody thought poor, stupid people like me would dare vote against the elite. They just didn't think that we'd have the nerve to go against them, but we did. And the final thing, one other thing is David Cameron did rig the election in every way he could. He had the taxes paying for pro-EU leaflets. He tried to rig the question so that it said, do you want to stay in the EU? He rigged the question to make it very easy to get the answer he wanted. That was thrown out by Nigel Farage. The other thing they used was a thing called Project Fear. And in Project Fear, they just tried to get us all to be scared about leaving the EU. Oh, if you leave the EU, you'll wake up and there'll be a zombie invasion the next day. Oh dear, so you can't vote against the EU. But some of our politicians did ridicule this. And one of our best politicians, you may have heard of Daniel Hannan, fantastic politician, pro-Brexit and everything. He's actually a member of the EU, an MEP, member of European Parliament. He would say things like this: if we leave the EU, we'll be invaded by giant mosquitoes. Just wonderful stuff. He found a few others as well, so we'll have these giant spiders invading, we'll be hit by dragons burning London, we'll have space invasions of aliens because we're not in the EU. Project Fear. Politicians love to use Project Fear. Now there's one final thing that they did as well. They thought that even if we left the EU, that we wouldn't leave the EU. What do I mean by that? We would leave it in name, but like the Hotel California, we'd never be able to leave. So we'd have a deal, so the EU court would still be supreme. We'd have to let in EU immigrants. We'd have to do this, we'd have to do that, such that effectively we haven't really left. Still in it, just not in name. So there we have the worst of all worlds. But we did actually win, and I'm hoping that in the next general election with Mrs. Theresa May, she's so frightened by people like me with pitchforks, and I do have a pitchfork. I'm going to oil and polish my pitchfork and march to Downing Street. And if she tries to kind of get out of the way, then she's going to try and stop us, then I will march to Downing Street and attack her with my pitchfork. There we go. So the problem is with this kind of secession is we don't have any dragons hiding behind us. We're going to have to do this by ourselves. Now, I'm not naive enough to believe that the state will just go away just because we won one election with 52%. The kleptocrats remain, and they're plotting and they're scheming for power. History is not a thing outside of ourselves, but it's only a description of things that happened, but these people are still very powerful. They still have central banks, and that is probably their key weapon, the power of central banks, and we must try to undermine that in a particular way. Now, we must also follow the lessons of people like Bernardo O'Higgins and Simon Bolivar and other wonderful people from the South American kind of history. One thing that surprised me, though, is why there hasn't been, I mean, the whole of, I don't know if you can see this here, the whole of Spanish South America broke up into many, many countries, but Brazil, the Portuguese part, stayed the same. I also noticed you've crept a bit to the left since this agreement was brought up. I mean, where are you there? You're kind of to the right of the L, and now you're over here. How did that happen? How did you do that? How did you creep over there? But I'm hoping that maybe you know more about this than me. Leave Mercosur to get away from a South American superstate. But you can't call it Brexit if you do, can you? Because we have Brexit in the UK. We own Brexit. So I've worked hard, and on the plane, Brexit, don't like the sound of Brexit. Brexit, you can't have it, it's ours. How about that, okay, when you leave Mercosur? I was quite proud of that. There are some things I've read about. My Portuguese isn't good enough, but there's O Sul o meu país in kind of Porto Alegre and Rio Grande do Sul. But I'm going to let you kind of work all that out for yourself. But my message to you is, and I've got a couple of minutes left to do this, we must achieve Brexit everywhere, not just in the UK, everywhere. We must help all secessionists everywhere, whether this is Venice, California, Catalonia, Scotland, Rio Grande do Sul, anywhere. We must help secessionists. Now, you might challenge me with that. You might say, well, the people in California or the people in Scotland are deeply socialist, so why should we help them secede? Why should we help Scotland secede from the UK or California secede from the United States? Why? Because as states shrink, they get less and less powerful, much less powerful. It's like a kind of gravity law. You halve the size of a state, you will quarter the power of that state that remains. And the state that remains as well will be much more dependent on free markets. So we see Singapore and Hong Kong and all these tiny places absolutely reliant on the free market. So they're much, much freer than large countries like Brazil, the United States, Canada and so on, which can afford to be more socialist because they have most of the things they need within their borders, and they can allow greater islands of socialist economic chaos within those. There's Rio Grande do Sul again. I'm not sure about these German flags. What's going on there? I saw a town as well. Was it Novo Hamburgo? And I thought, what does Novo Hamburgo mean? That's very strange. So we should help Venice secede from Italy. We should help everywhere secede from everywhere. We should even help the Scottish socialists secede from the UK, because even though they profess to be socialists, once they're a small country, they will have to abandon socialism. They cannot rely on English taxation anymore. They will have to become more free market. And then Scotland will become the economic powerhouse that it was in the kind of 17th, 18th and 19th centuries, when it sent engineers and other people. And Adam Smith, of course, was from Scotland, and David Hume and all these fabulous people. So, as Hopper said in A Short History of Man, we should try to create a constellation of micro-countries like Monaco, Singapore and Hong Kong. And then socialism will starve. We must break up these large entities, and then socialism will starve. As states shrink in a linear fashion, as the UK leaves the EU, and then the EU falls apart, and as Scotland leaves the UK, and as Cornwall leaves the UK, and as Henley-on-Thames, the greatest town in England, leaves England, and I'm elected king for life, which is what I'm really after, we will see this much greater freedom around the world. Cry freedom, of course, being the Scottish call. Now, I want you to dream of these things too. I want you to dream of a world full of Hong Kongs, a world full of Singapores, a world full of Monacos, Andorras, and the free kingdom, free republic. I won't be the king, I'll just be the life dictator of Henley-on-Thames, part of Oxfordshire, part of England in the future. So everywhere you see secession, I want you to support it, I want you to sponsor it, and I want you to help it. And then eventually, over time, everyone in this room can be as powerful as Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage took on an entire European elite of tens of thousands of extremely well-paid and very educated people. He beat them. He smashed their project. So I want you to try and do the same. I'm challenging you all to make as much difference as Nigel Farage did. And then we can go beyond having less Marx and more Mises, Menos, Marx, Mais, Mises, and then we shall have 0 Marx and 100, todo Mises, todos Mises. Thank you very much.
Bom, obrigada, Andy, pela palestra formidável. É uma honra para nós todos podermos ouvi-lo a partir de experiências tão genuínas e profundamente comprometidas com o ideal que você acredita. Eu tenho uma série de perguntas aqui. Deixa eu ver aqui. Você acredita que mais países seguirão o caminho aberto pelo Brexit para fora da União Europeia? Quais os países que você acredita que irão por esse caminho e por quê?
I think it's a chaotic situation in Europe because we have. Oh, I need to just take these off while I answer. Because once Britain leaves, Britain was the second biggest payer into the EU, and once Britain goes, Germany will be the only net payer left, virtually, with that maybe Finland and maybe the Netherlands as well paying in. So massive pressure will come on Germany to fund all the socialism for all the other countries. It's like Spain and Portugal and all the other countries. And I think that pressure could come to bear on Germany. But it's a bit like when you hit a rock full of fracture planes with a hammer. Who knows how it will crack? You know it will crack, but just where it will crack, it depends on the fault lines and the forces within the rock. So that's Europe. I think as well, I think the really big place that could go, I'm hoping anyway, is somewhere in the United States. That would be marvelous. If somewhere like California could leave, or Texas could go, or the Free New Hampshire Project could break away. that would be amazing. Also, anywhere that's big, so Quebec leaving Canada, they're kept in by taxation and subsidy. Maybe Canada runs out of tax, so Quebec leaves, great. Western Canada breaks off and goes with, Vancouver goes with Oregon. Venice leaves Italy, Catalonia, Barcelona, the best football team in the world. I've lived in Barcelona for a while. Barcelona break away, Catalonia breaks away from Spain. That would be incredible. That would be incredible. So yes, I think I don't want to say historically, with historicism, I think we've reached a point where the state is going to fall away for a while, at least I hope so. Anyway.
Andy, você acredita que as penalidades que serão impostas pela União Europeia, pela saída pelo Brexit, eles vão afetar diretamente o país? Todas essas penalidades que a União Europeia irá propor e...
Right. First thing, this isn't a divorce where we own a house together. So imagine me and you married and we divorce and we own this table and we cut it in half. Britain could just leave and just say, we're leaving. You know, what are you going to do? Get the German army to invade? You've tried that twice. Didn't work. And I like Spitfires. But Theresa May, who's the Prime Minister, who's about to win a huge general election probably, she wanted to remain in the EU. So there's this kind of fifth column of Remainers within the Conservative government. That's why I need my pitchfork and I need a candle and I need a match and I need to burn these people's toes. And we need to hold these people's heads to the fire until they get us out of this horrible monster thing. So maybe there'll be some deal, but we must get out of the EU Supreme Court. We must get out from a big payment. Hopefully it's zero, but maybe a few billion I could almost live with. But 100 billion pounds or euros, ridiculous. Hopefully it's nothing. But we should just I think we should just do a hard Brexit. Goodbye. Do your worst. What, you're not going to sell us Mercedes? You're not going to sell us BMWs? You're not going to sell us wine? You're not going to let us go on Greek holidays? Oh dear. Well, cry. Do you think Brazil might be able to supply us with holidays? Brazil might be able to supply us with cars? Brazil might be able to supply us with wine, or Chile, or Argentina? We don't need to pay any penalties. There is no judge above us. If we got divorced, there'd be a judge above us telling me to give you half my stuff. There's no judge here. I just walk away, or you just walk away. Then do your worst. Oh, let's put my things in here.
Bom, a gente vai aqui para a última questão, porque também o nosso tempo já expirou. A última pergunta é se o Andy poderia nos falar sobre a Escócia e a posição escocesa sobre a saída, sobre o Brexit, né, sobre a saída da União Europeia.
Scotland, well, I'm called Andy Duncan. I'm actually genetically Scottish. I'm Celtic more than anything. I go to parties on New Year's Eve, and I'm the only person that doesn't talk like that. I say, Andy, you sound English to me. What's wrong with you? Sorry, grandfather. The problem with Scotland is deeply socialist. The reason it can afford to be socialist is because it receives massive tax subsidies from England. So England with 50 million people, Scotland with 4 million people. Taxes on the English, huge taxes, really make life in Scotland much more comfortable for the state sector. And many people in Scotland work for the state. I think it's 1 in 2 people in Scotland works for the state or works on a private contract where the only customer is the state. So there's a huge built-in kind of leverage against leaving the UK because all those government jobs would go in the Royal Navy, the Civil Service and tax departments and many other things. So you've got that huge rump of people who will never leave the UK. But people in Scotland, my family, are very, very pro-Scotland. Free Scotland. Watch Braveheart, Andy. Oh. And it's drilled into them from a young age, you know, believe in Scotland. So there's these two things going on. There's two countervailing forces. It's very close. It's probably 45% will never vote to leave. 45% will vote to leave instantly, and there's 10% in the middle who could be swayed. And I think the Scottish Nationalist Party will keep trying until they win. they will keep coming up with excuses until eventually they get the result they want. And I'm hoping that will be in 5 years, maybe 10 years. I hope it's inevitable.
Okay. Andy, it was a pleasure for us hearing you this afternoon. Thank you.
Okay. Muito obrigado.
Muito obrigada.